The Senate Foreign Relations Subcommittee hearing was supposed to be routine. Just another day, another testimony, another stack of prepared questions. That's what the aides thought. That's what the cameras expected. But then Ibrahim Traoré walked in. President of Burkina Faso. 36 years old. Former military captain turned head of state. His rise had rattled corridors of Western power, and his refusal to bow to international expectations had earned him both admiration and suspicion. And now, he had been invited, reluctantly, by a bipartisan group of senators to speak on U.S.-Africa relations. The room was packed. Staffers, journalists, policy wonks. Traoré wore his military uniform, crisp, unflinching, and unbothered by the whispers surrounding him. At the center of it all sat Senator John Neely Kennedy of Louisiana. Folksy, sharp-tongued, and never one to shy away from controversy, Kennedy leaned back in his chair, watching Traoré take his seat at the witness table. Cameras flashed. Traoré opened with calm, calculated remarks. The future of Africa is not something to be negotiated behind closed doors, he said. And we do not ask for permission to reclaim what has always been ours, our dignity, our land, and our voice. Kennedy raised an eyebrow and smirked. That's mighty poetic, Mr. Traoré, he said into the microphone. But let's cut to the chase. You've nationalized American mining contracts. You've kicked out French troops. And you've made it clear you'd rather work with Russia and China than us. Tell me, what part of that makes you fit to lead anything, let alone a country? The room fell silent. Traoré didn't blink. Excuse me, he said, tilting his head just slightly. Kennedy leaned in. I said, you're not fit to lead. You're reckless. You're dangerous. And frankly, I'm not sure what qualifies a man with your resume to even sit in this room. That was it. Gasps. A few aides froze. Even the press corps looked up from their notes. Traoré sat still for a second. Then he slowly pushed his microphone closer and spoke, quietly, but clearly. Mr. Kennedy, he said, a man who claims to defend democracy but mocks elected leaders of sovereign nations doesn't get to question fitness. You see a uniform and assume dictatorship. I see your voting record and see hypocrisy. Kennedy shifted in his chair. Traoré wasn't done. You ask what qualifies me to lead? The answer is simple, my people chose me. Not a donor. Not a lobbyist. Not a defense contractor. My people. Murmurs filled the room. One of Kennedy's aides tried to slide him a note. He ignored it. Let me be even clearer, Traoré added. I didn't come here for validation. I came here to remind you, we're not your subjects. This is not 1960. Someone in the back whispered, did he just say that? He had. And he meant every word. Kennedy stared across the table, lips pressed tightly together. For a man used to commanding rooms with southern charm and sharp quips, he suddenly looked unsure of his next move. The silence was loud. Traoré didn't flinch. He let the stillness linger, weaponizing it. The kind of pause that makes the powerful sweat. The kind that forces a room to realize it's witnessing something unplanned. Uncontrolled. A junior senator from Vermont tried to interrupt the tension. President Traoré, if I may redirect to the regional implications of. But Kennedy cut him off, voice clipped. Let the man speak. I'd like to hear more about how he sees our country. It was part challenge, part damage control. He was trying to spin it. Traoré's eyes didn't move from Kennedy. You want to know how I see your country? He asked. I see a nation built on bold ideas, powerful ideals, and deep contradictions. A country that speaks of freedom, yet supports regimes that crush it. That sells democracy like a product, but hoards power like a weapon. Kennedy's mouth twitched. The smirk was gone. You say I'm reckless, Traore continued. Yet it wasn't me who bombed villages in the name of stability. It wasn't me who overthrew governments through proxies. I am not the architect of instability, I'm its cleanup crew. Some in the room shifted uncomfortably. A CBS News reporter scribbled furiously. Traore wasn't just making headlines. He was rewriting the script. I've never invaded a country for oil, he said calmly. I've never backed a coup. My worst offense, in your eyes, is that I asked foreign companies to pay taxes. That I said our gold belongs to our children. That I refused to kneel. Kennedy finally broke eye contact. That's when Traore leaned in, just slightly, voice lowering. I'm not here for a fight, Senator. But I won't accept lectures from men whose wars stretch continents and whose banks launder suffering. No one moved. The C-SPAN camera operator quietly adjusted the zoom. Kennedy cleared his throat. Well, he said, trying to gather himself, you seem awfully comfortable insulting your hosts. I'm not your guest, Traore replied. I'm your equal. That line hit like a bell tolling across the chamber. And just like that, the hearing had become something else entirely, not diplomacy, not debate. A reckoning. The tension in the room had thickened like fog. Committee Chairwoman Diane Clark, a seasoned lawmaker with a sharp instinct for headlines, looked up from her papers and studied the air around her. This session was meant to evaluate African development funding, she said carefully, her eyes darting between Kennedy and Traore. Not colonial ghosts. Madam Chair, Traore said, respectful but firm, with all due respect, those ghosts still cast shadows. You send aid with one hand and extract resources with the other. Development is not charity when it comes with strings. The room stilled again. Traore had just done what few dared. Speak the unspeakable, in the heart of Washington. Clark shifted in her seat. That's a serious accusation, President Traore. It's not an accusation, he replied. It's arithmetic. American companies made $12 billion from West African mines last year. Burkina Faso got 3% of that. You call it partnership. I call it tribute. Kennedy scoffed. You're oversimplifying global trade. I'm clarifying power, Traore said without missing a beat. Your deals are written in English, signed in dollars, and enforced by men with guns. My people sign with their land, their lungs, and their future. Gasps echoed faintly from the back rows. A White House staffer looked nervously at their phone. Chairwoman Clark cleared her throat. Let's move forward. Senator Vance, you had questions about the transparency of Burkina Faso's military budget? Senator J.D. Vance, seated beside Kennedy, leaned forward. Actually, I'd like to continue on this theme of equality President Traore seems so fond of. You say you're not a guest here, but this is the U.S. Senate. This is our room. Traore turned toward Vance, his expression steady. If this room was built to host only those who agree with you, it's not democracy. It's theater. I'm just saying, Vance replied with a smirk, that maybe a little humility would go a long way. Traore tilted his head. I bring humility, Senator. But I do not bring submission. The line hit hard. The chairwoman looked like she wanted to end the hearing early, but the cameras were rolling. Cutting it short now would look like surrender. And then Traore added something that changed the room again. Burkina Faso isn't here to beg. We're not asking for permission. We're stating our position. At that, even the junior senators sat straighter. This wasn't the script they expected. Not the tone. Not the message. The world had grown used to African leaders speaking softly, asking for aid, pleading for trade. But Traore had come not as a student, nor a supplicant, but as a sovereign. And now the room had to decide, argue, or listen. For a long second, no one spoke. The Senate chamber, normally a fortress of certainty and structure, now felt like uncertain terrain. A visiting president had just challenged not only policy, but posture. And he wasn't backing down. John Kennedy leaned forward again, his southern drawl more pronounced now. "Let me explain something to you, Mr. Traore. Power is earned, not assumed. And from what I can see, your country's trying to run before it learns to walk." The remark sliced through the air. Traore didn't flinch. He didn't look at Kennedy. He looked past him, toward the American people watching, toward the cameras broadcasting live. "Power," he said, his voice calm and deliberate, "is often taken by those who confuse dominance for leadership." Kennedy sneered. "You think you're a leader? Leading who, militias with Soviet rifles?" That one drew an audible reaction from the audience. Traore finally looked directly at him. "I lead a nation that refuses to kneel," he said. "Which is more than I can say for some leaders who bend at the slightest pressure from their donors." Chairwoman Clark banged her gavel gently. "Let's stay on track, gentlemen." But it was too late, the room had shifted. The energy had changed. Across the country, millions watched the exchange unfold in real time. On social media, the hashtags were exploding. Hashtag Traore claps back, hashtag Senate showdown, hashtag Burkina not begging. Outside the chamber, protesters from both sides were beginning to gather, some waving American flags, others holding signs with Traore's face next to the words, "Respect sovereignty." Meanwhile, back inside, Senator Vance leaned over to Kennedy and whispered, "He's not playing defense. That's why they're watching." Kennedy scowled. "They'll forget by tomorrow." But even he didn't believe it. Traore continued. "I did not come here to insult. I came here to illuminate. We are tired of being told the cost of our freedom by those who've never paid it." Clark looked weary. "President Traore, I think we need to recess." Traore held up his hand. "Not rudely. Just enough. I'll leave with this," he said. "Burkina Faso is not your experiment. We are not your failed state. We are not your moral charity. We are your mirror. And maybe, that's what frightens you most." And with that, he sat back in his seat. Not triumphant. Not angry. Resolved. It wasn't just a room that had been shaken. It was the foundation of a conversation long overdue. 3 floors above the Senate chamber, inside a private conference room secured for top-level briefings, a dozen advisors and staffers from the White House watched the live feed in silence. Aides scribbled notes, analysts exchanged glances, and the president's chief of staff slowly turned off the screen. "Did that just happen?" someone finally whispered. It wasn't a question. It was disbelief. Traore had come into the lion's den and made the lion look like a relic. At that very moment, in the Eisenhower Executive Office building next door, National Security Advisor Paul Reimer looked up from his tablet. "He's not a populist. He's something else." "Arrogant?" offered a younger staffer. Reimer shook his head. "No. Controlled. Calculated. He came prepared for war but fought with words. That's dangerous. That's influence." Down in the Senate corridors, John Kennedy had stormed out of the chamber. Cameras chased him down, but he barked, "No comment," and disappeared into a black sedan. In contrast, Traore stayed behind. He met quietly with 2 junior senators, one Democrat, one Republican, both of whom had never spoken to an African head of state before. He answered their questions, not with arrogance, but precision. He quoted American thinkers, James Baldwin, Thomas Paine, Frederick Douglass. He referenced the Constitution. He understood his audience. Not as an outsider, but as someone who had studied the room, and refused to bow to it. "You think he's campaigning?" Senator Richards whispered to her aide. "Because it feels like he's campaigning." No, the aide replied. Worse. He's convincing. That night, on the Situation Room, CNN replayed the exchange again and again. The moment when Kennedy snapped. The moment when Traore didn't. Pundits couldn't agree. Was Traore disrespectful? Was he dignified? Did he cross a line? Or just draw one? But one thing they all agreed on: he wasn't forgettable. And in the West African capital of Ouagadougou, crowds gathered outside large LED screens to watch the rebroadcast. Young students cheered every time Traore spoke. A boy sitting on his father's shoulders whispered, he stood up to them. The father nodded. And he didn't blink. Back in Washington, Traore sat in a quiet hotel suite with his translator and 2 aides. He looked out over the city. He looked like he had power, one aide said of Senator Kennedy. Traore replied calmly, power looks like that when it's threatened. Then he smiled. We haven't even started yet. The next morning, inside the White House Situation Room, the president's top advisors gathered around a large oval table. The mood was tense. Not because of military threats or economic instability, but because of one man's words echoing louder than intended. Traore's performance yesterday shifted the optics, began National Security Advisor Paul Reimer. He didn't just defend his country. He made a case against ours, without raising his voice, without pointing fingers. The defense secretary leaned forward. He accused us of economic manipulation, called our military bases ghosts of colonialism, and said Africa doesn't need permission to rise. That's more than optics. The president didn't speak. He tapped his pen slowly, then finally asked, what's his endgame? Silence. He's building something, said Reimer. A narrative. A movement. A coalition maybe. Not just for Africa, but for the global South. And if he keeps winning moments like yesterday, he'll have followers from Detroit to Dakar. A speechwriter looked up from her notes. He quoted Malcolm X and Ronald Reagan in the same sentence. Who does that? Someone from the State Department whispered, a problem. Meanwhile, across D.C., Senator John Kennedy was in damage control mode. His office issued a formal statement attempting to reframe the exchange. Senator Kennedy remains a strong supporter of free speech and robust debate. While passions can run high in the chamber, his commitment to American values remains unwavering. It was hollow. Everyone knew it. Worse, it was drowned out by social media clips of Traore's line, the people you once ruled now read your history. We don't need your approval, we need your respect. That quote went viral. Millions of views. Remixes. Reaction videos. Even late-night comedy shows couldn't resist. Jimmy Fallon laughed, Kennedy challenged Traore's legitimacy. Traore responded like it was the Harvard debate finals. On The Daily Show, the host joked, I haven't seen an American senator get cooked that badly since, well, yesterday. But beyond the jokes, something deeper had taken root. In college campuses, students discussed the shift in power narratives. In policy circles, experts analyzed the rhetoric of emerging leaders from the global South. And in conservative media? Panic. He humiliated one of our own, said a Fox News host. Traore isn't just bold, he's dangerous. And he's being celebrated for it. Back in his hotel room, Traore reviewed the footage one last time. Did we go too far? Asked his advisor. No, Traore replied. We didn't go far enough. He turned to the window, gazing at the Capitol dome in the distance. I came here to be heard. Now it's time to be remembered. Inside a dimly lit studio, a panel of political analysts debated the fallout from Traore's appearance. He's not just charismatic, said Angela Monroe, a former diplomat. He's precise. He didn't raise his voice once, but made half of Washington look like amateurs. A conservative commentator scoffed, oh please, this is just another flavor of the weak radical. Give it time, he'll fizzle out. But the moderator leaned in. That's not what the numbers say. His speech has over 12 million views in under 24 hours. A U.S. senator was left speechless on live TV. This isn't a fizzle. It's ignition. Meanwhile, behind closed doors at the State Department, strategy meetings turned frantic. How did we misread him? A senior official barked. We assumed he was another populist military figure. Not this, philosopher-warrior hybrid. Another analyst added, it's worse than that. He's positioning himself as the voice of the post-Western world. And people are listening. Across the globe, leaders from Brazil, India, and South Africa released carefully worded statements about respecting emerging perspectives. In quiet diplomatic language, that meant only one thing: they were siding with Traore, at least for now. In Washington, Senator Kennedy wasn't taking it well. He canceled 2 public appearances and avoided all press. When asked privately if he regretted his comments, he muttered, "I should have stayed in my lane." But the damage was done. And Traore? He wasn't done talking. He held an informal press briefing in a downtown D.C. hotel. No podium. No teleprompter. Just him, standing before a half-circle of reporters. "I didn't come here to insult America," he began. "I came here because Africa no longer wants to be spoken for. We'll listen. We'll trade. But we won't kneel." A reporter asked, "What do you want from the U.S.?" "I want honesty," Traore said, calmly. "And I want the next generation to know that dignity is not a gift from the West. It's something we already had. We're just done apologizing for it." The room went silent. And far away in Louisiana, Kennedy turned off the TV. The moment Traore's words echoed across television screens and social media feeds, a storm erupted, not in Africa, but in America. On Capitol Hill, conservative voices scrambled to contain the narrative. "This man is not our ally," thundered Congressman Walters on the House floor. "He disrespected a sitting U.S. senator. On our soil. And we gave him airtime?" Others echoed the outrage, but the backlash didn't come solely from the right. Some progressives criticized Traore's confrontational tone, saying diplomacy required humility, not defiance. But the real threat wasn't the critique. It was the momentum. Clips of his exchange with Senator Kennedy trended under hashtags like #TraorTruth, #RespectIsEarned, and #NewVoicesRising. Teenagers on TikTok mimicked his line, "We'll trade. But we won't kneel." Activists made it a chant. The White House communications team was caught flat-footed. A senior advisor whispered in a closed meeting, "We let a lion into the room and expected a handshake." Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, the population erupted in celebration. Crowds marched in Ouagadougou holding signs that read, "He spoke for us," and, "Not a guest, an equal." It was no longer just about a debate, it was about validation. But Traore, far from celebrating, remained measured. In a private meeting with his team, he reminded them. This is not a fight for ego. It's a fight for recognition. We don't win by shouting louder. We win by standing taller. Still, the threats began to arrive. Anonymous messages. Veiled warnings. A security agent handed him a phone with a brief text from an unknown number, "You embarrassed the wrong people." He smiled. "I've been embarrassing colonizers since I could talk," he said. "Let them get in line." Later that night, a CNN anchor asked, "Has Traore just shifted the balance in global diplomacy?" No one answered. But inside think tanks, embassies, and boardrooms, the question kept repeating. And in Louisiana, John Kennedy poured himself a drink, turned off his porch light, and muttered, "I never should have opened my mouth." The next morning, the headlines were unmistakable. A new global voice, Traore redefines leadership on U.S. soil. Kennedy rattled, Traore unbothered. Africa's rising star just outclassed Washington. Major media outlets were divided. Some praised Traore as bold, authentic, and refreshingly unapologetic. Others warned that his abrasiveness could hurt future relations. But one thing was certain, he had become unavoidable. In an emergency session at the State Department, officials reviewed clips, transcripts, and sentiment analysis. One aide said what everyone was thinking. He just did in 1 hour what a decade of diplomacy couldn't, he got the American people to listen. Meanwhile, on college campuses and urban centers, his name was plastered across posters and protest signs. "We don't kneel" was scrawled in graffiti outside a military recruitment center in Chicago. Activists from Detroit to Dallas invited him to speak. A new movement was swelling. But not everyone celebrated. In a closed-door meeting on Capitol Hill, Kennedy addressed a group of donors and intelligence officials. "We have to stop pretending this is about words. This man is building a brand off our weakness. He's smarter than we gave him credit for. And he's dangerous." Back in New York, Traore sat quietly in his hotel suite overlooking the skyline. His assistant handed him a list of new media requests: CNN, MSNBC, even Joe Rogan. "I'm not here for fame," he said, brushing the paper aside. "I'm here for equilibrium." He stood up, adjusting his collar. "I spoke the truth, and they called it arrogance. But I saw it in their eyes, the fear that maybe, just maybe, they can't control the story anymore." His phone buzzed. A message from a diplomat in South America. "You've opened a door. We're right behind you." A pause. Then another. "They used to speak about us. Now, they'll speak to us." Traore looked out the window, calm and focused. "The world didn't change last night," he whispered to himself. "It just noticed who's been standing here all along." The UN General Assembly chamber was silent, not out of formality, but because every delegate, aide, and journalist knew something rare was about to happen. Traore approached the podium. No notes. No teleprompter. Just a man with conviction. He looked out at the sea of suits, some skeptical, some curious, some quietly terrified. "I was told I don't belong in this room," he began calmly, eyes fixed on no one and everyone. "I was told I'm too young, too foreign, too African to lead a conversation about the future. But let me say this, you don't get to decide who belongs in the rooms of history." There was a flicker of movement in the American section. Kennedy sat stone-faced, arms crossed. "Some of you call yourselves leaders because you inherited titles. I had to earn every ounce of mine, in the fields, in the streets, in the silence of betrayal." His voice grew sharper, each word like a clean cut through a thick curtain of pretense. "You speak of global order. I've seen the cost of your order. And I am not here to ask for a seat at your table. I'm here to build our own." He paused. "I do not hate America. I hate hypocrisy. I do not resent wealth. I resent theft. I do not seek revenge. I seek repair." The chamber shifted. A few diplomats straightened their backs. Others averted their gaze. "To my people across the global south, to the youth watching behind screens, to the forgotten, the dismissed, the laughed at, remember this moment. You are not guests in this world. You are architects of its future." A single clap echoed in the chamber. Then another. And another. Within seconds, the room erupted. Not everyone applauded. But enough did to make it irreversible. Traore nodded once, stepped away from the podium, and exited without a word. Outside, cameras flashed. Microphones extended. A BBC reporter yelled, "Mr. Traore, what do you think you achieved today?" He didn't stop walking. He simply said, "They know I belong now. And that's only the beginning." And with that, Ibrahim Traoré vanished behind the diplomatic cars and security guards. But his words stayed behind. They echoed through embassies, down editorial halls, and across the hearts of a generation. This wasn't just a speech. It was a shift. In a world where power often wears the mask of tradition and arrogance hides behind titles, one voice dared to cut through the noise. Ibrahim Traoré didn't just respond to an insult. He redefined what it means to belong. When Senator Kennedy questioned his right to lead, Traoré didn't raise his voice. He raised the standard. And tonight, the world watched as a man once dismissed stood tall in a room meant to keep him small. Leadership isn't inherited. It's earned, in courage, clarity, and conviction. And if anyone still doubts whether he belongs, they weren't listening. Because sometimes, the loudest answer is given in silence.